Matilda of Boulogne was a force to be reckoned with. Wife to King Stephen of England, she was one of the most politically involved medieval queens of all time, and it's likely that without her, her husband would not have held on to his throne as well as he did. This video looks at her life and how she came to be one of the most important queens of the 12th century. Matilda of Boulogne was born around 1105 into one of the most prestigious noble families of Europe in Boulogne, funnily enough. She was the daughter of Eustace III, Count of Boulogne, and Mary of Scotland, a princess of the Scottish royal family. Her mother was the daughter of King Malcolm III of Scotland and his wife Margaret of Wessex, making Matilda the great-granddaughter of an English princess, as her grandmother Margaret was a descendant of Alfred the Great. This unique blend of Anglo-Norman, Scottish and English royal blood made Matilda an extremely well-connected noblewoman. Her father, Eustace, was a crusader who had fought alongside his brothers Godfrey of Boulogne and Baldwin I of Jerusalem during the First Crusade. The Boulogne family had gained immense prestige from their involvement in the conquest of the Holy Land, with Matilda's uncle Baldwin becoming the first king of Jerusalem in 1100. These connections reinforced the family's power, which would make Matilda an incredibly valuable heiress. She was raised in the courtly world of Boulogne, an important county with close ties to both England and Flanders. It was strategically located along the Channel coast, making it a key player in Anglo-Norman politics. Matilda would have been educated in courtly etiquette, household management, diplomacy, and the expectations of queenship. Given her noble status, she likely learned Latin, the language of the church and administration, allowing her to read religious texts and official documents. She also would have been well versed in genealogy, law, and politics, especially as she became heir to Boulogne. Additionally, she probably also had some training in literate arts such as letter writing, a crucial skill for noblewomen involved in governance. Her education, though informal by modern standards, prepared her for the strategic alliances, negotiations, and leadership roles she later undertook as queen and regent. In the early 1120s, Eustace decided to retire to a monastery, following the common practice of many aging medieval noblemen who sought to end their lives in religious devotion. With no male heirs, Matilda became Countess of Boulogne in her own right. However, ruling alone as a female was rare in this period, and it became crucial for her to marry a powerful nobleman who could help govern her lands. Matilda was soon promised to Stephen of Blois, and they were married around 1125. It was a highly strategic alliance. Stephen was the son of Stephen Henri, Count of Blois, one of the wealthiest and most influential noblemen in France. His mother was Adela of Normandy, daughter of William the Conqueror, making Stephen the grandson of the first Norman king of England. The marriage between Matilda and Stephen had immense political advantages. It strengthened Stephen's claim to the English throne. Since Stephen was a grandson of William the Conqueror, marrying Matilda, a woman of Anglo-Norman and Scottish and English royal descent, bolstered his credibility in England. Matilda brought vast estates in Boulogne, which lay in a critical position for controlling trade and military movements between England and the continent, which made Stephen a more formidable power broker. And Matilda's family ties to Flanders, Scotland, and Jerusalem meant she had valuable diplomatic connections that could be leveraged in times of crisis. Not only this, but their marriage was reportedly a strong and affectionate one, a rarity in medieval royal unions that were often purely political. At the time of their marriage, neither Matilda nor Stephen had any reason to believe they would ever rule England. The throne was securely held by King Henry I, the son of William the Conqueror, who had ruled since 1100. However, Henry's succession plans were thrown into turmoil when his only legitimate son, William Adelin, died in the White Ship disaster in November 1120. Henry turned to what was an unusual solution for the time. While he would remarry in the hopes of creating another male heir, he would eventually name his daughter Empress Matilda as his new heir. She was married to Henry V, at the time Holy Roman Emperor, and had lived abroad in Europe since she was a young child. So not only was she a woman, but she had barely seen the country she had been born in. At first, King Henry may have looked amongst his nephews, and it's possible this was part of the reason he was involved in Stephen marrying Matilda in preparation for if he named him as heir, her lineage would make Stephen's claim stronger. But in 1125, Empress Matilda became a widow when her husband died, and her father called her back to England. By 1126, King Henry publicly named Matilda as his heir, although it's likely he still hoped he would have a son with his new wife Adeliza of Louvain. He required his nobles to swear an oath of fealty to both himself and Matilda, agreeing she would become their queen. Not only was Stephen one of the first nobles to swear fealty to his cousin, but apparently he argued with Matilda's half-brother Robert of Gloucester to be the first to do so. Stephen, however, came from a highly ambitious family. His mother, Adela of Normandy, had been a formidable political player herself, ensuring that her sons had high positions in both England and France. She had raised Stephen with the expectation that he would achieve great things, and by the 1130s he had become one of the wealthiest and most influential nobles in England and Normandy. In December 1135, King Henry of England died, leaving the succession in a precarious state. Despite his efforts to secure the throne for his daughter Matilda, the English nobility remained divided on accepting a female ruler. Stephen, despite his promise of fealty, which had also been renewed a few years after, moved swiftly to claim the throne, seizing power with the backing of many of England's leading barons and securing the royal treasury in Winchester. Not least because the Bishop of Winchester, Henry of Blois, was his brother. His quick coronation in London on December the 22nd, 1135, marked the beginning of a contested reign, setting the stage for a civil war known as the Anarchy. Matilda of Boulogne was instrumental in consolidating Stephen's claim. Unlike many medieval queens, she did not remain a passive figure. Instead, she worked tirelessly to secure alliances and strengthen her husband's fragile position. Her influence among the Anglo-Norman nobility and the church played a crucial role in maintaining stability in the early years of Stephen's reign. Recognizing the church's authority in legitimizing kingship, Matilda worked closely with leading clerics, including Henry of Blois. She encouraged Stephen to make generous grants to the church, solidifying clerical backing for his rule. As tensions mounted between Stephen's supporters and those loyal to Empress Matilda, now Queen Matilda, acted as a mediator, attempting to diffuse conflicts before they escalated into outright war. She used her personal connections and diplomacy to ensure loyalty among key nobles, particularly those who held estates in Boulogne and Normandy. Her family's continental influence made her a valuable asset in securing cross-channel support for Stephen's rule, and the lands Stephen had gained from Matilda by marrying her were pivotal in helping him sway the traders of London and gain their valuable support, mostly to allow the wool trade to pass easily into France from England. Despite Stephen's initial success, challenges to his rule rose quickly. In 1138, rebellions broke out in northern England, particularly in Northumbria, where local barons remained sceptical of Stephen's authority. David I of Scotland, Empress Matilda's uncle, saw the crisis as an opportunity to invade England in support of his niece's claim. Queen Matilda played a direct role in mobilizing troops and organizing defenses to suppress these threats. While Stephen focused on military campaigns in the south, Matilda ensured that loyal barons such as William of Aumale and Thurston, Archbishop of York, coordinated efforts to hold the north. She helped secure reinforcements and supplies for the royalist forces. But one of the most critical confrontations of the period occurred at the Battle of the Standard in August 1138, when English forces defeated the Scots near Northallerton in North Yorkshire. While Matilda did not directly lead troops into battle, she was heavily involved in rallying support and ensuring that the northern lords remained united. Matilda worked diligently to convince the Anglo-Norman lords of the north to unite against the Scottish threat. Many of these nobles had been sceptical of Stephen's rule, but Matilda's efforts helped persuade them that defending the kingdom from a Scottish invasion took precedence over internal disputes. She used her diplomatic influence to encourage loyalty, ensuring that local lords committed their forces to the battle. She also took responsibility for ensuring that troops in the north were well supplied and equipped for the confrontation. Matilda worked closely with Thurston again to frame the conflict as a religious duty, emphasising that it was not merely a dynastic struggle, but a defence of Christian England against invaders. Through these efforts, Matilda proved herself to be more than just a queen consort. She was a skilled strategist, a political negotiator, and an unwavering defender of Stephen's rule. However, the challenges to his kingship would only intensify in the coming years, leading to open war with Empress Matilda. Stephen's taking of the throne had marked the beginning of the Anarchy, a 19-year civil war that would tear the country apart as Empress Matilda battled for what was rightfully hers. There was an argument that since William the Conqueror had introduced the idea of inheriting the throne, it was her throne. Plus, she had experience of being regent for the Holy Roman Emperor during her first marriage, and she had excelled at it. On the other hand, it wasn't so distant that kings had been chosen even if they weren't the son of the previous king, and Stephen had proven to be a capable leader of his lands, if not an actual kingdom. This was the reason there was no clear resolution for nearly 2 decades, as it wasn't actually easy to pick a side. A defining moment in the Anarchy came in February 1141, when Stephen suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Lincoln. Tensions had been escalating between Stephen and the powerful Ranulph of Chester, a noble with shifting loyalties. When Stephen moved to besiege Lincoln Castle held by Ranulph's forces, he underestimated the strength of the opposition. Robert of Gloucester, Empress Matilda's most trusted general and half-brother, arrived with a well-organised army to break the siege. Stephen, unwilling to retreat, chose to stand his ground, despite being outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The battle was brutal. Stephen fought with remarkable personal bravery, wielding his sword and even an extremely old battle axe when his weapon broke. However, his forces were overwhelmed, and he was dragged from the battlefield and taken prisoner. His captors swiftly transported him to Bristol Castle, where he was held in chains, a humiliation that symbolised the apparent collapse of his reign. With Stephen in captivity, Empress Matilda moved quickly to consolidate power. Many of Stephen's supporters abandoned his cause, believing his rule to be over. She prepared for her coronation in London, ready to seize the throne. However, Matilda of Boulogne refused to accept defeat. While many nobles hesitated, she immediately took command, rallying Stephen's remaining allies and plotting a counter-offensive. Her swift strategic response would prove instrumental in reversing Stephen's misfortunes and prolonging the war, ensuring that the fight for the English crown was far from over. Following Stephen's capture, Empress Matilda made preparations for her coronation in London. The city, at first, seemed willing to accept her rule, but she soon alienated the local population by demanding heavy taxation and acting high-handedly towards the citizens and clergy. Although much of this may have been more to do with losing Stephen's trade routes than anything, as many of the citizens included traders. On top of this, she never actually asked for anything they hadn't already given Stephen. Matilda of Boulogne seized this moment. She quickly mobilised an army, including mercenaries from Boulogne and Flanders, rallying Stephen's supporters and marching on London along with William of Ypres. As Empress Matilda prepared for her formal coronation within the Tower of London, she was suddenly faced with an unexpected military threat. As Matilda of Boulogne's forces advanced, the city's population turned against Empress Matilda. Just days before her coronation, Empress Matilda and her forces were forced to flee the city in disarray, abandoning her plans to be crowned. It would be more than 400 years later that a female ruler would sit on England's throne. This dramatic turn of events reversed the momentum of the war, restoring Stephen's faction as a serious threat to Empress Matilda's ambitions. Matilda of Boulogne's decisive action in London ensured that Stephen's cause did not collapse, proving that she was more than just a queen consort. She was a war leader and strategist. In other words, it was his queen that turned the tide of the war for Stephen and ensured he kept the throne for now. Even after driving Empress Matilda from London, Stephen remained imprisoned. His captivity presented a significant challenge, as many nobles hesitated to fight for a king who was unable to lead them. Matilda of Boulogne once again took command of the situation. Recognizing that Stephen's return was critical to maintaining control of the kingdom, she orchestrated a daring diplomatic maneuver to secure his release. After leaving London, Empress Matilda's forces had moved towards Henry of Blois at Winchester, planning to capture the royal treasury by siege and cause a stalemate. Queen Matilda took charge of her husband's forces again, directing them to cut off the enemy's path in a pincer movement towards Winchester. They were successful in defeating Empress Matilda's army, led by Robert of Gloucester, and he was captured. The Queen immediately saw an opportunity, and she negotiated a prisoner exchange, agreeing to release Robert of Gloucester in return for Stephen's freedom. The Empress had little choice but to agree. Queen Matilda couldn't get people to fight indefinitely for a king in chains, and Empress Matilda needed Robert of Gloucester's men and money for her cause. This negotiation restored Stephen to power, ensuring that his claim to the throne remained intact. It was Matilda's diplomatic skill and ability to turn setbacks into opportunities that proved indispensable to Stephen's survival. Without her leadership, once again, he might never have regained his position. Even after Stephen's release, the war was far from over. England remained deeply divided, and the anarchy descended into a prolonged stalemate, with neither side able to achieve total victory. England itself became a battleground, with various lands ravaged by travelling armies for food, shifting loyalties as one side leaned more to the Empress or the King. During these years, Matilda continued to be one of Stephen's most trusted advisors and supporters, securing vital alliances with church leaders and nobles who remained uncertain about the outcome of the conflict. She played a key role in maintaining control over strategic territories, particularly Boulogne, ensuring that Stephen's resources remained intact. She strengthened ties with the papacy, helping to ensure that the church remained an ally to Stephen's cause. And Matilda's ability to manage both military strategy and political diplomacy allowed Stephen to weather the storm of the anarchy even when victory seemed uncertain. By 1148, the tides of the anarchy had begun to shift. Empress Matilda, after years of struggle, failed to consolidate power in England. Her support had waned, and after multiple setbacks, including her inability to hold London and her dramatic escape from Oxford Castle in the winter of 1142, she eventually returned to Normandy. However, she hadn't actually given up the fight for the English crown, but instead passed it on to her son, Henry of Anjou. Though Henry was still young, he quickly established himself as a formidable leader, determined to reclaim England's throne for his family and carry on his mother's cause. He travelled to England when he was around 14 and was taken under the wing of Robert of Gloucester. In contrast, Stephen's reign, though somewhat stable, was never fully strong enough to completely wipe out those who sided with the Empress. Henry himself began to inspire followers, keeping the war going by slowly shifting supporters to his side. While the civil war had drained the kingdom, Matilda of Boulogne remained at the heart of Stephen's efforts to maintain power, and she remained a key figure in ensuring the continuity of his dynasty. With Empress Matilda's departure, obviously the war did not end, but it entered a new phase, one centered on the succession question. Stephen and Matilda now focused on securing the future for their eldest son, Eustace IV. Unlike Stephen, who had claimed the throne by seizing it opportunistically, Matilda was determined to ensure that Eustace's succession would be legitimate, recognised and undisputed. Eustace had already been formally recognised as Stephen's heir by his father's supporters, and in 1152 Stephen took an additional step. He attempted to have Eustace crowned during his own lifetime, a practice known as coronation during the king's reign, which would have cemented Eustace's right to rule. However, this plan failed due to opposition from the church. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Theobald of Bec, refused to anoint Eustace, likely due to pressure from the papacy, which increasingly leaned towards supporting Henry of Anjou's claim. Theobald's refusal was a devastating political blow, as it indicated that the church would not fully back Eustace's legitimacy. Despite this, Matilda remained steadfast. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes, continuing to lobby powerful nobles and clergy to support her son. Given her diplomatic successes earlier in the war, it is highly likely she tried to negotiate with Theobald of Bec and other clerical authorities, but their commitment to peace and growing favour towards Henry of Anjou made them reluctant to prolong the conflict. After years of relentless political manoeuvring and military struggles, Matilda's health began to decline by late 1151. The years of war had taken an immense toll on her, and unlike Stephen, Matilda would not live to see the Treaty of Wallingford or the formal end of the Anarchy. Despite her deteriorating health, Matilda remained politically active until the very end. She also deepened her relationship with the church, likely seeking spiritual solace after the years of brutal conflict, like many other medieval queens. She had been a generous patron of religious institutions throughout her life, and in her final years, she spent more time in prayer and religious devotion, preparing herself for the next life. By early 1152, Matilda's condition worsened significantly. Weakened by stress and likely illness, she withdrew from court affairs and focused on securing her legacy. She died on the 3rd of May 1152 at the Priory of Hedingham Castle, one of the strongholds of the De Vere family, who had remained staunch allies of Stephen. Matilda's death marked the beginning of the end for Stephen's reign. Although Stephen would rule for 2 more years, he had lost his greatest supporter, strategist, and confidant. Without Matilda's unwavering political acumen and strength, Stephen struggled to maintain authority, and the final resolution of the Anarchy would soon be determined without her influence. She was buried at Faversham Abbey, where Stephen would also be laid to rest a few years later. At the beginning of 1153, Henry returned to England once again, and he was supported in the north and east of the country by Ranulph of Chester and Hugh Bigod. Stephen marched his forces to Malmesbury when Henry's army took one of his castles there, but a temporary truce was called when the wintry weather prevented Stephen from travelling further. During the summer, both sides met at Wallingford, standing either side of the River Thames. However, the nobles on both sides, after 19 years of protracted war, were not eager to meet in open battle. Instead of fighting, Henry and Stephen met and brokered another temporary truce. They spoke afterwards, and it was decided that Henry, instead of Stephen's son Eustace, would become Stephen's heir. Stephen knew that his son simply didn't have the backing of the church or many of the nobles that Henry had, and it would have meant a difficult kingship for his son. Not to mention, as he grew older, he would have considered the legacy he was leaving for the country, and it's likely he didn't want to be remembered merely for leaving England in a war-torn state. Giving the throne to Henry was a peaceful solution to a foregone conclusion. Eustace was understandably angry and removed himself from court. The treaty was a bitter but necessary compromise. It meant that Stephen's dynasty would not continue, but it secured stability for England after nearly 2 decades of war. But the situation took an unexpected turn in August 1153, when Eustace died suddenly, reportedly from an illness. Some medieval chroniclers suggested that he had suffered from divine retribution, given his violent actions against the church of looting abbeys to fund the war effort, but the real answer was simply that medieval life could be short. Regardless of the cause, Eustace's death was a crushing blow to Stephen. His passing completely altered the political landscape, as there had always been the chance of him possibly regaining the throne if he grew support, but now it was gone. Stephen had another son, William of Blois, but he was seen as a weaker claimant. Not only was he younger and less experienced than Eustace, but he lacked the aggressive military reputation needed to command loyalty in the war-torn kingdom. On the 25th of October 1154, Stephen died while travelling to Dover, and Henry was declared king. No one challenged the young man's claim to the throne, despite him not moving as fast as Stephen had from France. Everyone was ready to have peace after 2 decades of war. On the 19th of December 1154, Henry was crowned Henry II of England, and Empress Matilda had won by ensuring her claim passed to her son. But it was clear she had had an impressive rival, not only in Stephen, but in Queen Matilda. Matilda of Boulogne is rightfully remembered as one of the most politically active and influential queens of medieval England. Unlike many royal consorts of her time, who played only a passive or symbolic role, Matilda was a true partner in governance, actively shaping the course of English history during one of its most turbulent periods. Throughout her life, Matilda demonstrated a remarkable ability to navigate complex political landscapes. She was not simply a queen who stood beside her husband, she was a diplomatic force in her own right, securing critical alliances that allowed Stephen to maintain his grip on the throne. Had Matilda not taken such an active and pragmatic role in diplomacy, it is highly unlikely that Stephen could have held the throne for as long as he did. Beyond diplomacy, Matilda was a wartime queen who played a direct role in military affairs, a rarity for medieval consorts. She personally rallied forces to defend London, forcing Empress Matilda to flee before she could be crowned. Her involvement in recruiting and financing mercenary forces provided Stephen's faction with much-needed reinforcements. Furthermore, her model of active queenship influenced later medieval queens who found themselves in times of political instability. Matilda demonstrated that queens could be more than symbolic figures. They could be leaders, strategists, and warriors when the situation demanded it. She was more than just a queen. She was a ruler in all but name, and her legacy as a politically engaged and fiercely determined consort stands as one of the most remarkable in medieval English history.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.